The Wyoming House of Representatives, 66th Legislature. The 18th day of our session will please come to order. Deputy Clerk, please call the roll.
Convening roll, 18th day, Thursday, March 11th, 2021. Come on. Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flittner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Hinner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Swanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Haroldson. Burt. Harshman. Nicholas. Wharf. We have 58 present, 2 excused.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Members, if you'll join Father August for our prayer. Welcome, Father August.
Really slow.
The theme today is on love. 1 Corinthians 13:8. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. Lord, your love is stronger than death. Your love is infinite. And your love makes truth and justice meet. Your love gives us fresh courage and hope among the many struggles and hardships in life. Lord, allow your great love to guide our minds and hearts so that all the work we do in this chamber will truly make us better human beings and bring great blessings to the people that we serve in Wyoming. Amen.
Thank you very much, Father August. We look forward to your message tomorrow. Journal Committee report.
Your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of March 10th, 2021 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Provenza and Haroldson.
Thank you. Messages from the Senate.
Message 201. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 2, School Facilities Project Prioritization. Ayes 29, noes 1. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 202. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading by the vote indicated. Senate File 74, Athletic Trainer Revisions. Ayes 30. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 203. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading by the vote indicated. Senate File 93, WICHA Repayment Program Veterinary Medicine Students. Ayes 21, noes 9. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 204. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading by the vote indicated. Senate File 108, Career and Technical Education Terminology. Ayes 30. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 205. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading by the vote indicated. Senate File 109, Board of Dental Examiners Amendments. Ayes 30. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 206. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 115, Education Pupil Teacher Contact Time. Ayes 30. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 207. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading by the vote indicated. Senate File 119, Investment of State Permanent Funds. Ayes 30. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Mr. Speaker, message number 208. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading by the vote indicated. Senate File 120, Investment of State Non-Permanent Funds. Ayes 30. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 209. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 130, Charter Schools. Ayes 26, noes 4. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 210. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 80, Public Health Orders, Local and Legislative Oversight. Ayes 21, noes 9. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 213. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 155, Limiting Firearm Seizure and Regulation During Emergencies. Ayes 28, noes 2. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk.
Thank you. Reports from standing committees.
Mr. Speaker, your committee number 1 Judiciary, to whom is referred House Bill 116, Concealed Carry Residency Requirement 2, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Craigo, Larson Dan, Oakley, Olson, Provenza, Rodriguez Williams, Washit, Swanitzer. Noes, Representative Yin. Representative Olson, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 1 Judiciary, to whom is referred House Bill 193, County Attorneys Representation of Special Districts, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Craigo, Oakley, Olson, Washit, Swanitzer. Noes, Representatives Larson Dan, Provenza, Rodriguez Williams, Yin. Representative Olson, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 2 appropriations, to whom is referred House Bill 125, simulcasting, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Larson, Lloyd, Nicholas, Schwartz, Stith. Noes, Representatives Kinner, Simpson, Walters. Representative Larson, Vice Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 2 appropriations, to whom was referred House Bill 158, local land use planning and zoning, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Kinner, Larson, Lloyd, Nicholas, Schwartz, Simpson, Stith, Walters. Representative Nicholas, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 4, education, to whom is referred House Bill 120, Hathaway Scholarships, Success Curriculum in Middle School. Respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Andrew, Brown, Connolly, Harshman, Nyman, Obermueller, Paxton, Summers. Excused, Representative Newsom. Representative Paxton, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 4, education, to whom is referred House Bill 152, Hathaway eligibility requirements. Respectfully report same back to the House with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Andrew, Nyman, Newsom, Paxton, Summers. Noes, Representatives Brown, Connolly, Harshman, Obermueller. Representative Paxton, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 4, education, to whom is referred House Bill 154, school finance, school district reserves. Respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Brown, Connolly, Harshman, Nyman, Obermueller, Paxton, Summers. Noes, Representative Andrew. Excused, Representative Newsom. Representative Paxton, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 4, education, to whom is referred House Bill 165, Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship Program. Respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Andrew, Connolly, Harshman, Nyman, Obermueller, Paxton, Summers. Noes, Representative Brown. Representative Newsom, excused. Representative Paxton, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 9, Minerals, Business, and Economic Development, to whom is referred House Bill 166, Utilities, Presumption Against Early Facility Retirements. Respectfully report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Bear, Burkhart, Duncan, Air, Gray, Greer, Heiner, Western. Noes, Representative Sherwood. Representative Greer, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 12, Rules and Procedures, to whom was referred House Bill 92, Revisers Bill. Respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Barlow, Brown, Connolly, Gray, Greer, Jennings, McGuire, Olson, Summers, Washut, Wilson, Yin, Zwanitzer. Representative Barlow, Chairman.
Well, committees have been doing good work. That's why you got a long committee, standing committee report. I think we have a couple of privileges of the floor. Representative Ayer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And a follow-up to my privilege last night, I'm very happy to report to you that the Wyoming Cowgirls, for the first time in history, won the Mountain West Conference title last night with a victory over Fresno State.
I guess that means on to the big show. Congratulations, Lady Cowgirls. I think there is a possibility today at noon, if somebody so wished. Apparently the boys are playing in a in a game today at noon or 1 o'clock. And so there is a possibility we could put it on the screen in here, not for the rest of the world, for members that may want to watch it. So if somebody does want to watch it over the noon hour, does not have a committee meeting, we'll get it on the screen. So we'll take care of that. Representative in the back, I see some folks from the northwest part of the state. So who are those fine representatives that would like to introduce them?
It's not very
Representative
often
It's
that we
not.
get people from Cody. But we have our Youth for Justice group here today, and you will all probably encounter them as they have their list of bills that they're supporting today. So for that county that has two number ones on its license plate, welcome the Cody Youth for Justice students.
Welcome. I'm glad you're here to see your representatives, Representative Newsom and Rodriguez Williams doing their work. Thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for that. Any other privileges? Any other privileges? All right, we're on that order of bills on second reading. First bill for our consideration is House Bill 14.
House Bill 14, sponsored by corporations, rights of way along public ways amendments, an act relating to rights of way.
We do have an amendment. Representative Summers.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'd like to move second reading amendment. Ooh, I got a bad copy. Second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 14 and ask for your favorable consideration. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the broadband bill. The idea behind this bill that came out of the task force was to make sure we could get projects on the ground in a reasonable amount of time. And we kind of heard the other day that there had how this bill came to you was kind of an agreement by all parties. It really was not. I think that was just a misunderstanding. I've worked with the good association that represents our counties, and I've worked with industry, and I bring this amendment to you. And what this would say ultimately on page 3, I'm just going to read the full sentence, which really would start on line 1. Unless a different period is stipulated by the parties, the City Department of Transportation or the county shall respond to the application, approve or deny all necessary permits, authorizations, and licenses not later than 60 calendar days after receipt of the application. And so this just makes it 60-day period. If folks, think that's too short a time period, like I said, I've talked to the group that represents counties, and they seem to be comfortable with that. We can work on it, but Mr. Speaker, that's the amendment.
Any member for their first time? First time, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for the amendment, I inadvertently spoke out of turn last time. Industry, there was a miscommunication, and the good majority floor leader corrected it with this amendment. So I strongly urge you to vote aye on this amendment.
Any other member first time? Members for their first time, members second time, seeing none. Members, we are voting on second reading, amendment number 1, House Bill 14. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. House Bill 14, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 160.
House Bill 160, sponsored by Representative Burt, election ballot order, an act relating to elections.
There is an amendment. Representative Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, colleagues. I do move the second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 160. The second amendment is just a minor change brought to my attention, working with the County Clerks Association. It's a technical fix that will allow the county clerks to implement this legislation. in the most effective way with no additional costs. This amendment simply removes changes to the statute, Wyoming Statute 22-6-122, and it rotates the names on the ballot per precinct instead of by ballot. We did have the committee of the whole, if you can remember that, the committee of the whole, it made that verbiage change a little bit. We had some contact with the vendors as well as the county clerks. They had a couple issues on that. So we went back to LSO and kind of change this back up. So it is kind of a big technical fix. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any members first time? Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In favor of the amendment, just to add on to that, the issue is you can do a lot of things with computer systems, but because we do have paper ballots as well and other ballots for hard of hearing or sight impaired, right? Trying to randomize paper ballots for some of these specialized cases is really difficult. And so this cleans up the language in addition to everything the good representative said.
Any other member for their first time? First time, members for their first time, second time to the sponsor. Anything to add, Representative Burt?
No, Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Thank you, members.
I would like to say I'm on favor of this amendment and request your favorable support.
Thank you. Members who are voting on second reading, amendment number 1, House Bill 160. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. House Bill 160, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 179.
House Bill 179, sponsored by Representative Zwanitzer. Optional municipal tax election, an act relating to taxation and revenue.
We do have an amendment. Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleased to move second reading amendment number 1 to the bill. And so this was a conversation on allowing your municipalities greater flexibility on when to hold these sales and use tax elections. We had some conversation on first reading that it was too broad. And so what I've attempted to do is to mirror the bond election statute. And so let me just read to you that you can put a bond question on the ballot, shall be held the same day as either a primary or general election, or on the Tuesday next following the first Monday in May or November, or the third Monday in August. So in non-election years, this would give you 3 times you could put the question on a ballot, just as they can now with a bond election. And then technically 5 times in an election year, because you could use, well, 4 times, I guess, 2 of those times plus your primary or general election. So it does put more sideboards on, and hoping this is more amenable to the body.
Thank you. Any member for their first time? Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I guess aye on the amendment because it's some sideboard, but still, I mean, 8 times every 2 years. I just think that, you know, I'm probably not gonna do an enacting clause on this, but I'm still no on the bill. I don't think this really, you know, I don't think this fixes the bill. I do want to make that clear, but thank you.
Any other member first time? Any other member first time? Second reading amendment number 1. Any first time, second time to the sponsor?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll take support any day I can get it in this body, however I can.
Thank you. Members, we are voting on second reading amendment number 1, House Bill 179. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. House Bill 179, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Next order of business is bills on third reading, and I don't believe we have a consent list. Since there was only one bill, we just decided we'd do them all regular. Okay. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the consent list consisting of the following House bills: House Bill 122, House Bill 150. And I guess I would like to pull 122 and 150 from the consent list.
I tried to get it there easier. Okay, all those in favor of the majority floor leader's motion, please say aye. Those opposed? Those that are confused? All right, so now we're at that order of business on bills on third reading regular list, because we have no consent list. You agreed to that because he pulled everything off consent list. We're on House, let's see, third and final passage. First bill for our consideration is House Bill 67.
House Bill 67, sponsored by Representative Harshman, geothermal energy review, an act relating to the administration of government being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Thank you. We do have an amendment. Representative Western. 67. We have no amendments. Sorry. Wrong. Follow the script, Representative Barlow. House Bill 67, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zwanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Jennings, aye to no. Brown, no to aye. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote is closed. 55 aye, 5 no.
House Bill 67, having received the majority vote, affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 67 has passed the House. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 122.
House Bill 122, sponsored by Representative Western, hunting and fishing access, reliable funding, an act relating to game and fish being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We do have an amendment. Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 122. All right, folks, pretty straightforward here. This amendment basically just kind of puts some sideboards on when the money must be expended. Kind of the whole thing is no hunter wants to kind of just give a bunch of money to the agency and have it just sit in an account somewhere with no specific timelines or guidelines on how they have to spend it and when. So this amendment just simply says, the time you collect this money, you shall expend this within 3 years to negotiate some kind of access agreement. It gives Game and Fish enough time to kind of tee up and get some stuff in the queue, but also ensures that the hunters will actually see that their money is getting bang for the buck and getting some results. So please vote aye. Thank you.
Discussion on the bill, discussion on the amendment. Chairman Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a question, trying to get my mind around, so we're buying access, you have a willing buyer, willing seller. So what happens if there's not a willing seller? Where's the money go? What happens if they don't spend it in 3 years? Do they take it and use it somewhere else? I'm just trying to figure out the mechanics of this, how that would work.
Thank you. Any other member first time? Any other member first time? Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A question which is a variance of the one asked by the good chairman of Minerals is, what happens to the money after 3 years if it's not spent? Where does it go? Because it'll be sitting there, and I don't think it's directed. That's just a concern.
Thank you. Any other member, first time, third reading, amendment number 1, House Bill 122. Representative Craigo.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Just a question for the bringer. You know, we think the good Speaker Pro Tem asked a question about willing buyer, willing seller. The question is, what if we have a willing seller, but now they know there's a time frame under which that money has to be spent? Does that give them a bargaining advantage?
Thank you. Any other member, first time? Any other member, first time? First time, second time before the sponsor, to the sponsor, Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the good chair of transportation, the money would just stay in that account. It's not, there's no redirect to any other account, so it would stay there. And to the old good country lawyer, you're right, it is a willing buyer, willing seller. It poses no obligation whatsoever on the landowner. They can take all the time they want to come up with any kind of terms they're comfortable with. And if they're not, they can say they can take a pass. And to the new country lawyer, I would offer more or less the same explanation that, again, there's no obligation whatsoever for the landowners. And this was an amendment that I worked out with the agency. They said that this gives them enough time based off the conversations they've had already with landowners. There's quite a few good leads, I guess, with landowners who are willing to engage in that conversation, but have just consistently said, hey, we just want you to pay for what we feel it's worth. And so it kind of puts those sideboards on there. It was something I worked out with this particular agency to ensure that it gives them the time they feel is adequate based off the willing participants, and also ensuring that the hunters get to see some return, that they're getting bang for the buck. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please vote aye.
Thank you. Members, we're voting on third reading, amendment number 1, House Bill 122. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Amendment has not been adopted. Division being called. All those in favor of the amendment, please rise. Thank you. All those opposed? A few more than 20? Thank you. The amendment has not been adopted. House Bill 122, having been read three separate times. The question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kinner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Worf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zwanitzer. Mr. Speaker, Closing vote. Are there any changes? Blackburn, aye to no. Duncan, aye to no. Air, aye to no. Yin, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote is closed. 34 aye, 26 no.
House Bill 122, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 122 is passed the House. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 150.
House Bill 150, sponsored by Appropriations, State Budgeting and Expenditure Authority, an act relating to public funds and administration of government, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
House Bill 150, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flittner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kinner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote is closed. 54 aye, 6 no.
House Bill 150, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 150 has passed the House. So members, just recall that tomorrow, House Bill 1 will be on third reading. House Bill 1, your amendments are due by 5 p.m. today and will need to be approved by you, the sponsor, 2 hours prior to convening time tomorrow. And I anticipate we'll convene at 10 o'clock unless there's some conferring between now and then with leadership, but we'll anticipate 10 o'clock. So with that, Chief Clerk, any other business before we kick it into high gear? Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House resolve itself into Committee of the Whole.
You've heard the motion of the Majority Floor Leader. All those in favor, please say aye. I thought they'd be a little more enthusiastic. All those opposed, say no. Okay, well, that helps. Representative Baker.
Committee of the Whole, please come to order. All right, thank you, members. The Committee of the Whole, please come to order. Just a little privilege here. Yeah, I did it once. So I have a proverb written on my mirror. It just says, "When pride comes, then comes shame, but with the humble is wisdom." So hopefully we can all be humble. The first bill for our consideration is House Bill 173, Majority Floor Leader Summers. Oh, actually, oh yeah. Will the reading clerk please read the bill?
House Bill 173, sponsored by House Education, School Finance Funding 2, an act relating to school finance. Mr. Speaker, your committee member for education, to whom is referred House Bill 173, School Finance Funding 2, respectfully report same back to the House with a recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Brown, Harshman, Newsom, Paxton, Summers. Noes, Representatives Andrew, Connolly, Nyman, Obermuller. Representative Paxton, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What's your pleasure, Chairman Paxton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a recommendation that House Bill 173 do pass, and I further move the adoption of the Standing Committee amendment.
Majority Floor Leader Summers, would you like to explain the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the 66, I bring you House Bill 173 and ask for your favorable consideration. So where did this bill come from? During the interim, the Select Committee on School Finance Recalibration met 9 days, listened to 5 different consultant groups, and received hours of testimony from stakeholders and the public. That is recalibration. Recalibration of the funding model is a court-ordered process now incorporated in statute that requires the legislature to review and update the K-12 funding model every 5 years. Mr. Chairman, we have a $300 million annual education funding shortfall out of a $1.5 billion K-12 budget. Wyoming has 5 Supreme Court decisions that have defined education funding. The Supreme Court stated in Campbell 2, in addition to holding the Constitution requires an equal educational opportunity for all Wyoming children, this court in Campbell held our Constitution commands the legislature to provide and fund an education system which is of a quality appropriate for the times, and that command goes well beyond simply allowing the legislature to dispense a minimum level of elementary and secondary education and then fund it as best it can amidst other competing priorities. Supporting an opportunity for a complete, proper, quality education is the legislature's paramount priority. Competing priorities not of constitutional magnitude are secondary, and the legislature may not yield to them until constitutionally sufficient provision is made for elementary and secondary education. So, Mr. Chairman, therein lies the rub. We have a large shortfall and a constitutional requirement to fund education. After all of these debates, House Bill 61 was the compromise out of the Recalibration Committee, a bill designed to provide a vehicle for discussion during the session. Mr. Chairman, your House Education Committee felt that House Bill 61 did not have all the elements necessary to have a full discussion on education funding, so we crafted House Bill 173. However, we continued to work on House Bill 61. Once House Bill 73 was drafted, we moved amendments from House Bill 61 into House Bill 173. And House Bill 173 Substitute 1 is the concept that is before you today. So that is the amendment. So the Standing Committee amendment is Substitute 1. Once the bill does 3 things. It incorporates constitutional reductions, diversions of existing revenue flows, and a tax. These 3 dials can be adjusted in different ways to solve our education funding challenge. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to walk you through House Bill 173 Substitute 1 by utilizing our staff's synopsis of the amendment that I sent out to members. This will also be in your mailboxes. And perhaps, Mr. Chairman, I should wait a moment and allow members to find this handout. So do most of you have this handout? If not, go ahead and go to the mailbox and pick up your handouts, which includes the substitute bill and the handout. Mr. Chairman, thank you for that moment. So back to the discussion of the standing committee amendment, which is substitute bill number 1. So why is this, let's talk about why this bill is so fat to begin with, why it's so thick. And so what this bill does that other bills have not done is it actually pulls all the components of the legislative model into what would be a bill that would be put in the green books. So in the past, when we've made adjustments, when the funding model was originally done, it was done in session law. And it was done by an attachment, what was called attachment A in session law. And then over time, as we have amended that bill, as we have amended the funding model, we have simply amended that session law in other session law. And so it has become very hard for staff to track all those amendments in session law back to session law. So rather than going the old route and just referring to an attachment in session law, we would actually pull all these components into the green books. And so then when an amendment was made, it ends up back in the green books and it's pretty easily tracked. And so that's kind of that first paragraph you see. And so the funding model, so the legislative model was the base model in 173. And so what we did in the course of amending was we increased class size by 2 in elementary from 16 to 18 and in middle school from 21 to 23. We increased salaries for teachers by 10%. So what happens is when you increase class size, which is what districts have currently done, most districts have larger class size than what the model provides. And the reason they do this is to actually pay teachers more because they can't hire teachers. So we're recognizing that in this amendment. And why it's not a direct cancellation of one or the other, it's kind of just right sizing to what we currently do. And then when you look at number 3, it adds nurses based upon the 2020 recalibration recommendation. This was a fairly substantial recommendation by the consultants, just based upon the number of students that have needs in districts that we used to not see. And then 4, central office administration and salaries were cut by 10%. This was, I guess, a recognition that from what we hear from the public and at least what we hear from some public that perhaps administration is overpriced. We left it the way we did because we wanted to leave it within the block grant. And then finally, probably the one that cuts the most money or has the largest reduction, because the first 2 kind of balanced, is it modifies the health insurance component to only provide funding to those employees actually enrolled in a school district's health insurance plan equivalent to state employees. Districts can still retain any savings from funds that are not expended on health insurance. So what this does, it becomes reimbursable rather than you just get automatically the health insurance that's attached to an employee in the model. So the districts get resourced all of these resources. in a block grant. School boards go out and then they decide how many employees they're actually going to have and what they pay for them. And this just says you're only going to get reimbursed on health insurance for your actual employees. But we say to the districts, now, if you can go out and find a policy that's more thrifty than the state's plan, then we're going to let you make up those savings. And districts kind of generally do that. And if you didn't have this provision, there would be, I guess, no reason not to just go to the state plan or go to a plan of higher value. And then this bill also modifies the ADM in two different ways. It lowers the threshold from 80% to 75% for a full-time student. We've had this conversation in the past on the floor. And so by lowering it to 75, it allows a child to still be full-time and do some work. Or perhaps, there's other activities that they participate in outside of the school, and it just allows those students to do that, and still the school can retain a full ADM at 75%. And then the other thing it does is it removes school year 2021 from the ADM calculation for the next 3 years. The model will still use the greater of the prior year's ADM or average without school year 2021. And the reason this was put in there, and it was an amendment of mine, is I think this school year is an aberration. And we've got a lot of districts that are down ADM, some virtual districts that are up ADM, some moved to more homeschool environments. And I think this will shake out and we'll see a difference. And so the idea was just basically kind of like a hold harmless on this. And that costs money. I think when I asked about it, it was about a $7 or $8 million tag. I can't remember exactly. And then finally, going on to see this bill increases reserves for school districts from 15% of the prior year to 25% for 5 years. And that percentage, that increased percentage cannot be used for purposes of capital construction. And this is for two reasons. One is if we're going to be in a reduction mode, it does allow districts, if they have some savings, to put more in their reserves and bleed that out over time. But really the larger reason is we've got some federal stimulus packages or relief packages. And we have one coming up that's also got K-12 in it. And so if districts get some money from the feds that they could then use within their kind of their block grant, we don't want them to have to spend it in 1 year. And so the idea is to let them put that in there, bleed that out over the course of 5 years, and utilize those monies more appropriately. And then in D, we just put in there that any reductions would be phased in equally over 3 years. Ultimately, we didn't know where the body will go on reductions, but we do know that whatever's put in place, if something's put in place this year, if districts haven't already compensated for that, because of when contracts will come out, it'll be very difficult. So the idea was just to phase this in. And then, Mr. Chairman, if you go to go to page 2, and I guess really I could almost take you to page the last page that has all the graphs on it. And so if you look at the far right-hand column, all of those things we did in the substitute bill is in that far right-hand column. Everything that was originally in House Bill 173 is the middle column. And on the right-hand column, you'll see the reduction of 9.8 million. That's because it was phased in over 3 years. It ends up being about 31 million added up after all 3 years. If you jump back to page 2, this is where we deal with revenue sources directed to K-12 education. And so if you look at the first line, this is the investment earnings off the permanent mineral trust fund. And basically, that redirects permanent mineral trust fund investment earnings in excess of 2.5% up to the spending policy amount from the legislative stabilization reserve account to the school foundation program. And so this is a stream of investment earnings that is what we call the LISRA refuel. And so that's going back into the LISRA to refund the LISRA. This just says, let's recognize where our hole is in, where our shortfall is, and let's put it into education. And the reason we looked at existing revenue flows is if we are going to look to taxes or ask our citizens for a tax, I think we on that committee felt it was really important to look at our existing revenue flows that go to savings and see if we should divert some of them. And then obviously before we implement a tax, we should spend down savings. So you'll see us bringing in revenue flows. And the second, and so the estimated maximum amount that would be distributed based upon that 5% spending policy would be about 99 million a year. And then if you go into the severance tax, and we've had a good discussion on the OPSTA account and the severance tax, we have that 1% statutory severance. And so what this does is leave 2/3 going the way it always goes, which statutorily, except for a blip in 2022, it goes to the permanent mineral trust fund. And so this would say 2/3 still goes where it's always gone, and 1/3 would go to the SFP, to the school foundation program. This would be about 22 million per year. And then finally, the bill has an insurance policy in it. And that is if the LISR drops below 650 million. So now remember, 500 million is the amount of money we need to kind of cash flow the state of Wyoming. So, and it's not unlike a rancher. So a rancher, we may get 2 or 3 checks a year, but we have expenses all year. And so we kind of use our savings to bankroll the operation until we get our bigger revenues that come in. States the same way. Revenues come in at different times, but expenses often go out early in the biennium. So that's kind of the reason. And then we picked 650 million. We wanted to make sure we left a little cushion on that for other emergencies, other times. And so what this would do would kick in a 1 cent sales tax entirely for K-12 education when the LISRA drops below 650 million. And then in this document, you can read that based upon the good folks in our back room, it says the long-term fiscal profile estimates that the 1% sales and use tax could be imposed as early as fiscal year 2025. And that's assuming, really, I don't think assuming like the 99 million a year that we would have from our investment earnings. So, in reality, I think it'd push it out maybe to 2026 based upon current analysis. And then as you can see down there in that last few lines, the PT and the permanent mineral trust fund investment earnings, about 99 million, severance 22 million. That would be 2022 revenue, about 121 million. And when all the revenue is turned on in the bill, then you have more than that, over 300 million. And, just to jump back here, Mr. Chairman, I want to remind everybody that this substitute is an amendment. We have many decisions in this discussion, but the first is whether we adopt substitute 1 as the base of our discussions. The original bill contemplated a higher reduction in $1 per ADM style reduction. The last page shows the reductions of the original House Bill 173 and the substitute. So, Mr. Chairman, I think our discussion first would be on the amendment.
We are on standing committee amendment number 1, which is a substitute bill discussion. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a bottom line person, so, review go through the bill, go through the summary sheet, the narrative, and that's fine. But then I turned to page 3 on the packet we got this morning. And so we start out with the original recal bill, and it has a 6.5% reduction in there. Then they do this House Bill 173, which has this tax increase in it. And as originally drafted, it's a 3.18% reduction in the guarantee. And so now they want us to adopt the substitute bill as an amendment. And at the bottom right-hand corner, the way I'm reading that is a 0.65% reduction in the guarantee. So we've gone from 6.5% to 0.65% in 3 iterations. They want us to add in a tax on this amendment. And I just sent in an email. Please correct me if I'm reading this wrong. But it's really difficult for me to, it just seems to be going off the rails here, 0.65% reduction. And I guess I add on a question of how many months will it be before the escalator eats up a 0.65% reduction? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 3 months? Is it 4? Because I don't think it's going to be very long at all. Thank you.
Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I think the good representative is correct. House Bill 61 started out with $100 million reduction. 173 went to you could say in the writing, it's 63, was 66 million. The graph, you can see where 173 actually was. And that all depends on where you start it. I think what your education committee wanted to do was we wanted to bring you a constitutional solution. There are some other places you can make reductions that I believe were probably constitutional, but we wanted to provide you a constitutional solution. And then ultimately, as we debate this issue back and forth and where we may want to go, that could all change. But that was the reason behind it. The decrease would be more than what was suggested because like I said, that was the first year of a 3-year phase in. So after the 3rd year, you would have 31 million, and that is more than the point whatever percent. So thank you.
Thank you. Representative Ottman.
Mr. Speaker and Majority Floor Leader, if you could just maybe make a couple things clear, because I know that you've been working hard on this, but I have a few questions. Okay, on number 5 on page 1, if the districts are encouraged to get the best insurance plan, right now I believe it used to be 90-10, and then it went to 85-15, and it's 80-20. Is that going to encourage the districts to find possibly policies that would be down to 60-40 or 50-50? I mean, when we're looking at those things. My second question would be in part B, number 2, no, I guess part C. No, B first. With people that have changed their mode of education, we have seen the ADMs go down. And I realize that school districts are having a difficult time getting kids back to school, but also finding out how that's working. But nevertheless, is this going to inhibit those changes that have been made and the people that are going to private schools or homeschooling? So I was just kind of wondering about that. And then in part C, could you explain with their allowable cash reserves, what exactly, because I know sometimes when the cash reserves go up, cash on hand is a lot less. So it makes it look like there's a deficit more than normal. So if you could explain how that's a benefit And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Further discussion, Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. On the health insurance issue, it would, right now, currently, districts can provide whatever health insurance plan they want. And they have mainly two different large groups that they work through for health insurance plans, but there are some that have individual health insurance plans. This wouldn't change that. This would just say, so right now we resource health insurance based upon what the state's health plan allows. So the policy we have for state government, whatever those policies are, the dollars associated with those policies, that's how we resource. Then districts go out and they provide health insurance based upon however their board wants to do it and whatever constraints are not in that. We don't delve into that. We don't say you have to do that. We reimburse them for whatever the state is. If they want to find a plan that is of less value, they basically take that savings and can use it for something else. What this does is, all this does is say, we're only going to give you health insurance for those employees that you actually employ, rather than positions that are resourced. And then on the, kind of the children that went off to private school, homeschool, this has nothing to do with that. That ADM, all that ADM does is say that districts, we're not going to show that. So how it works on an ADM, when districts are in a decline, they can use a rolling 3-year average to determine their ADM, to kind of soften the blow. And all we're doing in this is just saying, we're going to take this 1 year out because it's just kind of an aberration. It's not what we would normally see. It doesn't have to do with, a declining industry or just a drying up of a town. It's just circumstances. So that's what it does. I don't think it affects it doesn't affect homeschoolers or anything. And then cash reserves, I don't know how else to explain it, but just like the state, just like the fact that we have the LISRA to cash flow, that's kind of like our reserve to cash flow. Districts use that 15% to cash flow. This would raise it up in order to allow for more federal funds to come in and bleed it off over a period of 5 years. And then we would come back to that 15%. So if I didn't answer those questions, you'll have to catch me on it.
Further discussion, Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the 2-page handout from the bringer of the substitute bill. I'm noticing on the substitute bill, it is actually sponsored by the Education Committee, so it's a recommended move. On the spreadsheet on the 3rd page, by the way, it really would have been helpful for the Education Committee to have provided a 2-page summary of what the regular House Bill 173 did. Perhaps it's out there and we haven't received it. It'd been nice to be able to compare those, since that's what we're really doing with this substitute bill. But to the members of the House Education Committee, I have a fundamental question for you. Now, the governor asked K through 12 to cut their budgets by 10%. He didn't really ask them to cut, he asked us to cut. Remember, the governor does not control this funding mechanism, we do. So really the request for us was to cut 10%. The recalibration committee, those of you that followed it, spent a tremendous amount of effort listening, gathering data, listening to our education community, and they determined that a 10% cut was going to be too extensive. It was going to damage our education system too deeply. So they collectively, the House and the other chamber, both decided that a 6.54% cut was the right amount, that was a sustainable amount that could be cut. That totaled $100 million. So my question for the House committee is, you're recommending now that we reduce the cuts down to 9.8 million, which is less than 1%. Would you explain to me why we're deviating so significantly from what the governor requested and what the recalibration committee honed in on? They picked the number, and now you're bringing to us a bill that has significantly less cuts.
Mr. Chairman.
Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'd be glad to answer that. And so first, let's talk about the 100 million and what that represents. It is 6.5% of the model, but it is also 10% of what the state puts in. So just think about this. We have two pots of money that go into funding education. We have the local resources and we have the state resources. So that's what the state actually has to put in. 100 million is in fact 10%. And so we put in that in recal, and we did it in an ADM style reduction, frankly, because that was the only bill we could get out to have this conversation on the floor. Is an ADM style reduction constitutional? Is it cost-based? Maybe, maybe not. Likely not. So when we came into the House Education Committee, the individual actually that asked this question brought an amendment with around 100 million in it, but it was in each component. And so as the committee evaluated each component and the reductions in that, I believe we chose the ones we thought were the most constitutional and left the others out. This in 3 years, this is a $31 million reduction. It's not just 9.8. This 31 is phased in over 3 years. Are there other constitutional reductions that could be provided? I think there are, but I think you have to be very careful about what those are. And so I'm going to give you an example, not to bog you down in all of this detail, because if we get amendments, we'll get into all the detail. So for example, one of the components that was suggested we decrease from the current legislative model was IFs. But when we went through recalibration, our consultants, regardless of whether our districts like IFs or not, our consultants highly valued IFs. In fact, put in a large number more. And so I think we on the Education Committee felt, no, that's probably not a constitutional cut. Now, it's anybody's guess. We can cut anywhere we want, how much we want, and then you just write it out. But we brought you what we thought was constitutional. There are some other cuts that I think are constitutional or reductions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion, Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want the Education Committee, someone on the Education Committee, to take a whack at explaining the escalator to me. And this is how I wanted to explain. First of all, when did this go into effect, the escalator concept? What our budget was when that went into effect? Where obviously, I mean, this is a rocket leaving Earth, in my opinion, the escalator is. And I want to know in 20 years from now, where that projected escalator is going to put us, as well as we heard yesterday that we are, our attendance numbers in our schools are actually decreasing. And so I want to know also what that looks like as far as if we've had a projection of number of students in our public education system, say in that 20-year period. So basically, when did the escalator take effect? How much was our budget then? What is it currently? I mean, we know what it is currently, but 20 years from now, what the escalator is going to push it to? Because I understand the constitutional aspect of this, and I just kind of want to get a full-size picture. And then what is the percentage of our escalator?
Thank you. Further discussion, Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that you come back to me because my old brain's not going to remember 3 in a row. So thank you. And so I guess and I'd have a question back to the good bringer of that question. And that is, what escalator are you talking about?
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman?
Chairman, with privilege, Representative Harrelson.
Thank you very much. When we're talking about the fact that we are having the escalator percentage amount that we have to increase every single year to keep in touch with that court case that says that we have to basically keep the escalator going. Is that correct?
Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And so this escalator idea is interesting. There is no escalator built into the model. So let me tell you what inflates the model. What there is we have a process that the legislature goes through every year, and it's called the ECA process, External Cost Adjustment. The courts mandated that we look at inflation every year. So every year, Joint Education brings a consultant together. They look at these inflationary factors, indices. Joint Ed makes a recommendation to Joint Appropes, and then Appropriations ultimately makes a recommendation to the legislature. So there's no built-in inflationary index. The biggest inflationary index is probably health insurance. So when LSO, when they project the cost of education out through time, they project what is that inflation of health insurance, just like we have in state government, just like we have in private industry. So probably the largest escalator is just a projection of what health insurance might be over the period of the next year or 2 years. And then the next one, and I'd ask the question back is, well, how many children are we all going to have, right? Because the model is entirely based upon ADM. So if your population is increasing, like 1%, it's going to inflate the model by that. That's just kind of the way that goes. And then the last one actually resides outside of the model we're really talking about, and that's special education. Right now, we reimburse special education at 100%. And that has over time inflated, if you look at over time, inflated about 4% a year. And so we reimburse it 100%. That was a decision we made years ago. We looked at that again this year. A few of us drafted a bill. We ended up not running it to try to fix that. So those are kind of the escalators that I know about. Transportation's another one. It's outside of the model 100%. But we've done some things to temper transportation over the last few years. So you get reimbursed and you can buy new buses on certain things. So one thing we did is we increased the number of miles on a bus before you could replace it. And we made kids walk another, I think, half mile or a quarter mile to school. So you're not going to get paid to pick up those kids within a little broader circle now. And so I'm hoping over time that helps that. Special ed, totally agree. I brought that amendment on the floor last year to temper that, and I got the body slam on that one. And so, Mr. Chairman, if there's some other escalators that somebody knows about, I'm willing to visit about. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do thank the Education Committee for the work that they put in on this bill. But I think they have produced a P compared to the cost of this problem to our state. We take the amount of cuts that we saw yesterday in the health department and we compare those to the cuts in this bill. And it's definitely just a pea-sized cut, 0.6%. I think it's absurd to think. I came down here with the idea that we would work to reduce the amount of expenditure at a reasonable pace, and to possibly increase taxes this year to cover some of this deficit. But this bill does not include either parts of that solution. It puts off the tax increase to 2025. It doesn't reduce the expenditure, but by 0.6%. I don't think that that is worthy of passage. So I would urge this body to reject this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion, Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. A question for the representative from District 20, 3 questions actually. First, with the most specific question, I so appreciate the 2-page handout and the chart at the end. It really, really helps. It looks like the cost reductions, they appear to be evenly distributed, or should be. But when I look at the spreadsheet on the 3rd page of your handout, the cuts are very disparate between districts. So for example, Sweetwater County School District number 1 would take a $940,000 cut. That's Rock Springs, coincidentally. Sweetwater County District School District number 2 in Green River would take a cut of only $70,000, which seems odd because the difference between Green River and Rock Springs really is just that Green River is about half the size of Rock Springs in terms of its budget and students. So it's odd to me that Rock Springs would take a cut that's 13 times higher than Green River. That just seems odd. So if you could explain why the formula gives such disparate results for each school district. I would also echo the comments from the district representative from District 32 as well. 2 short other questions, just to clarify. There's a proposed cut of 10% to administration, central administration. And central administration is about $96 million statewide. So really that cut ends up being 10% of that's about 9.6. So that's about the 9.8 cut. And the other increases and cuts sort of offset each other. My question is, under our block grant model, the central admin people, the school districts, I should say, they could just ignore that and spend the same on central admin if they felt like it and take their cuts someplace else, right? And the third question is, it looks to me like under this bill, there is no LISRA refuel. That is the LISRA, if we adopt this, there will never be any more money that ever goes into the LISRA. Am I reading that correctly? Thank you.
Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So you're actually, when you talk about those 2 charts, great example, right? So the reason we came out of recal with an ADM style cut is it basically reduces everybody about the same, because it's $1 per ADM. And, but the question is that constitutional? Is it cost-based? And so when the 2 good representatives brought amendments to us to look at components in the model, we chose from a mix of those components. Every time you mess with any component in the model, you are going to start to get disparate percentages across districts. So those districts that were funding closest to the model would probably not show the cuts as those that had a lot higher class sizes, or were using, we're not employing the people that you thought they might have been employing for whatever reason. That's a board's decision. But every time you mess with a component, you change that because different districts fund things differently and rely on different mechanisms to fund their education model. So absolutely, when you start messing in components, and for example, if somebody ran one today, right? I want to do this for this component. It's going to come out and it's going to be all different because nobody's the same. And then LISRA refuel becomes the SFP refuel. And so yes, the LISRA refuel goes away. And I probably missed another one, but I'm sorry.
Further discussion on the Standing Committee Amendment number 1, which is a substitute bill. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and a sincere thanks to the bringer of the bill
and also the committee and the committee people that have worked so hard on this. I understand, and that's a lot of time away from home and family. And so a sincere thank you for doing that. So my question comes from my frame of reference. And I've seen the governor's recommendation. I've seen the committee's recommendation. I've seen the consultant's report. I'm capable of doing basic math. I can multiply by 10%, 6.5%, or 0.65%. And again, going back to my frame of reference, so several years ago, we had a similar situation where the governor had mandated a 10% cut to the department that deals with our health. And at that time, I happened to be on that committee. And so we would gather in, and at that time, the head of that department would come in and he would say, and he's since retired, he would say, okay, here's the roadmap. If we make these cuts, this is what we're going to have to do. And I remember specifically one, there was a little town that was 22 miles away from a little bit bigger town. And he said, we have a full-time office there now, but we're going to take that down to 2 days and we're going to staff it out of this other office. And so the people in this small town will still have service, but they're not going to have service 5 days a week. And he would go through item by item by item. And at the end of the meetings, and there were a lot of meetings, but at the end, I had an understanding of what would happen on the ground, what would happen to our people, what would happen to our constituents. Right now, I just have a 10%, 6.5%, or 0.65% multiplier. I have no idea what that's going to do to my school district. And so I'm just curious, is there somebody out there like that director who's kind of in charge of K through 12 education? And if so, did that person, come to these meetings? And is there a roadmap that I could look at? And I could say, this is what it's going to look like in my school district? So that's my question. And again, thank you for all your time.
Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So this information's been out to you for a while. All you have to do is pick up the phone and call your superintendent or the chairman of your school board to ask them what the impacts of any of this would be. And frankly, if you haven't done that, shame on you. Shame on you. And so I appreciate that. We all have to do our homework. And I think by the amount of emails showing that people, in the education world can support this. And it is more than a 0.6% reduction phased in over 3 years. It's 2%. There are other reductions we could do. There was a question a while back, and sometimes my mind comes back to a question that I forgot. It reminds me, oh, you were asked this. And that might have been by the first person that went to the mic. And that is what was in the original 173 bill. So the original 173 bill had a penny for education, but it was only the state share. And the local share still flowed to locals. It did not have the reserve piece in it, but it did have the ADM piece. It had a $66 million reduction based in $1 per ADM reduction off of a certain school year. And that may not be what the chart's based on in the back. All I can tell you is you submit these, Matt Wilmarth does his work, and you come back and you go, okay, that's what it is. That's what it is. And so those are the big things that the difference is basically we did an ADM style reduction in the original House bill. The sales tax was split between going to locals like it normally would and the state, and then the reserves, and it didn't have the 3-year phase. So that's the answer to that question. Thank you.
Further discussion, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good Majority Leader, I wanted to say how much I appreciate the amount of effort that's gone into this to get it to this point. I rise in support of this. I'm not all the way there yet, but I'm close. So I just had a couple of questions on taking this good model and then transitioning to, implementation. And we all know there's different circumstances in every county, every school has different ways of implementing and things happen, right? Look at the last year, things happen. So was there any discussion on those contingency moments, if you will, in terms of you got the model, you got the funding, and then you have the real world? And so how do we deal with those situations, in the rural setting and in the non-rural setting? You could help me with that.
Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And, I think that's a great question. And the good gentleman from Appropriations with the silver hair, he stated it well. I think districts have been preparing for something. Ultimately, what we do, they will be thinking about those hard choices they have to make now, and they'll be doing that now. I think they are waiting and wondering what that'll be. And the challenge is different in different districts. So let's take my Pinedale School District, the bigger one of the two. I got Pinedale and Big Piney. My bigger one has fairly stable ADM, probably the population's growing there. My Big Piney is an old oil and gas town, and it shows declining ADM. So you take a district that's been declining ADM for a while, and then you throw more cuts on it, it kind of exacerbates that. So every district is going to have a different style challenge. So, that's a local board decision.
Further discussion, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'd like to echo the comments from my friend from District 41. We are greatly appreciative of the committee that has spent many countless hours studying this issue, and for the good majority leader. I'm sure there was many sleepless nights thinking about this. Last year during the pandemic, a lot of industries were affected by the shutdowns, including our school districts, as they had to transition to a remote learning environment. And there's been numerous studies done by large universities on both sides of the continent, on the East and the West Coast, trying to ascertain what kind of savings, if any, were attained by schools while they transitioned to remote learning. And as I studied those results, the consensus is that school districts probably saw on the order of 2 to 3% savings, because they didn't have to pay for substitute cost, overtime, utilities, supplies, things like that. So during the testimony in your committee, Mr. Majority Leader, were there any discussion about savings that transpired last year and where those monies were put from those savings?
Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And so when we brought the consultants in fact, I think it was the good chair of Labor Health put into the recalibration bill that whole notion of remote education. And so we specifically asked the consultant, what about remote education? This world is changing, right? Have you figured this in the design of your funding model? And they said, no, we haven't, because the judge is still out. We do not have enough evidence yet to understand the implications of that. That was my recollection of what they said. As you know, in Wyoming, there was a short period of time it was all remote, but then we went really back to class pretty quickly. And so I don't know how much savings there was, if there was any. I know it was darn hard on teachers to try to to juggle all of those balls. But we did ask the consultant how that might change the model, because it was explicitly put in our direction, and they could not answer that yet.
Further discussion, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my good friend who lives over the hill from me. I hope he realizes that all these wonderful accolades that we lay on you for the hard work you've done reminds me of when my daughter was telling her 4-H hog how much she loved him as we hauled him to the slaughterhouse. Know of our respect for you, but know where you're headed. So, good friend, if you and Mr. Chairman, if there's a couple of things that I need some clarification on. And one is in the first page of the substitute. And I realize that all this conversation is on the substitute bill. This is an amendment to the real bill, and that's what we're talking about. But we've heard over the years that I've been in here, the reason we have this 3-year average on an ADM. And it was always presented to the body that, boy, you can't adjust the ADM based on 1 year, because you could have just this really funky year and it could really impact people. And so we've always been talked about how the consultant and everybody from divine authority down says this 3-year average is the right way to do it in a works. But yet when we get an anomaly of this year, we pull it out and say we won't count that. And I'm not sure that I understand why we would do that. Is it going to impact them? Sure. But if that was an inverse and the ADM was high, would we have made the same recommendation? And I would suspect not. And so I'm wondering why we mess with that. I know that some districts have really did see an impact, but that's what we had the 3 years. So if he could adjust a little more of his rationale on that. And then that kind of goes to the conversation a little bit on some of because that's really been kind of the consultant's recommendation over the year, is that we use this 3-year average. And so we're kind of hanging our hat on that. And then when we get to, when we talk about some of the amendments that were proposed, and one that was referenced by the good floor leader was IF's instructional facilitators, where the consultant says that those were really important, and because he thinks they're really important, then we need to do it. But the reduction, as I recall, in the amendment for instructional facilitators still left the numbers higher than what the districts were actually using. And so I'm not understanding why that seems to be a little bit, it seems like we could have still done it and complied with the consultant's recommendation that we have more and still reduce costs. And so if he would do that, answer that, that's my second one. And then on for the body, me and Mr. Chairman, me and this good man have had a lot of conversations, and one that I think that we have a responsibility to strengthen our tax structure. But my position has always been is we have to look at how we impose these taxes globally. And a 1% tax really affects the same people that are paying it now. And it's really your extractive industries. And they're the ones that are paying most of the bills, and they're the ones that really need some help. But we don't, in this effort to save K-12 in the event that we go below a certain amount, there's no effort there to say sales tax exemption stop for those people that are getting them, so that they have to pay their fair share to educate their children. It's just that we're going to impose an additional tax on others. And I would appreciate, and maybe you had some discussion on why, but I think the talk on a tax needs to be more global. And this just seems to be a little bit responsive. Well, the easiest way to settle this is to put a 1% tax on, and just as the way we have it right now, when I think the result of that can be far more damaging than the help it's giving back to education. And so I would like his thoughts on that. And then I was going to ask the question that's already asked on the leisure, so that we would have no more leisure refuel, and have some concerns there. So, old friend.
Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So sales tax. This is the percentage given us by the best of the best in our back rooms. Only 15% of the sales tax is paid for by the mineral industry. That's just telling you, that's what we got. About 8% is paid by out-of-staters. It's a tax on every citizen in the state. And we are one of the lowest in our surrounding states for what we provide for sales tax. Do I agree with him that there are other more equitable taxes? I absolutely do. I think a tax on services is better. It was just really difficult to try to figure out how to bring that into this discussion. As it relates to IFs, so I totally agree with him. So if we want to go to exactly what the districts spend, go exactly to the crew report, we'll be back at the same dollar amount, because districts spend more on some items and less on some items. So just because they spend less on IFs, it only means they spend more on something else. And so the argument to me is the legislative model funds instructional facilitators at much less of a level than what the consultants recommend. And I think if we drop that further, I don't think it's defensible. That's just my opinion. Now, if you want to drop IFs and shift that to wherever districts are putting it now, you end up with the same amount of money spent. And then finally on ADM, certainly a policy decision. If we want to peel that out, that's fine. I just think this is a very different year, and that's why this was put in there.
Thank you. Further discussion, Representative Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm feeling a little sympathy for the majority floor leader fielding all these questions nonstop. But I have a couple more. One is, are there items that we fund in this amendment that fall beyond the requirements of the Constitution? You know, we're constitutionally mandated to provide a system of education. Are there things that we fund that are beyond mere education? For example, extracurriculars, transportation, health insurance, are those things under the court decisions or under the Constitution as you read it, mandated by the Constitution? Or do we have some flexibility in those arenas that give us more flexibility than we do in the core element of education? That's would be my first question. And secondly, your comment about in order to make this a constitutional provision, you know, I received probably more emails in the last week telling me to vote for 173 without amendment. And so this is an amendment to 173. So I think the constituents are telling me to vote against this substitute bill. But in order to make this thing constitutional, I'm wondering, did the committee discuss perhaps the value of a constitutional amendment going before the people to see where they stand today as in terms of the Constitution? Thank you.
Majority Floor Leader Summers.
So, Mr. Chairman, on the first question, you know, are there elements that could be cut? I think absolutely on the reimbursable health insurance. I think that's easy. I think there are others. But if you look at what our consultants came out with, they came out with a different model, the EB model, their 2020 version. If you look at the total dollars, it was 20 million more than our legislative model that we're suggesting reductions on. Where you can reduce and then lose constitutionality, that's a court question, not an Albert question. And I lost track of that other one. The amendment. Yeah, the amendment, what your constituents sent you, I'm not sure, I think there was somewhat support for that substitute bill 1 amendment, but I can't answer that. I haven't seen your emails. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Further discussion, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to give the majority floor leader a chance to maybe grab a drink of water and not have to field another question here. And it's a little more just plain out discussion for this body. And I think the biggest thing that we have to sit here and think about is the question was just raised is what is constitutional? Well, we really have three situations in which we are held as this body, and of course the body across the hall here. We have to define what education is. Then we have to determine how much it costs, and then we have to fund it. Those are the 3 items that the Constitution requires us to do. So technically in this body, we as the policymakers get to decide what's in education. We've had this discussion a few times. We've had this discussion more than a few times. And so the idea of, well, is special education really constitutional? Do we have to fund that at 100%? How about transportation? Are we required by the state and the Constitution, are we required to make sure that every kid has a school bus to get to school if they live a certain distance away? How about athletics? Are we required to have athletics in every single school? And I think the answer to that is that's a policy decision for this body to make. I think that's up to us as the combined brains that have been elected to represent your people as to decide what in the world we want to say is constitutional and what we want to fund. Everything has a cost to it. Now, I've only been on this committee for 5 years. I know about this much about education policy. It is a much bigger monster than most of us even begin to recognize. And the gentleman that's been speaking and fielding all these questions, I'd have to say is probably one of the smartest individuals when it comes to education policy that this body is lucky to have. He's been here through a couple of these recalibration efforts, and I guarantee you he's read the Campbell decisions more than once, and probably the Washakie decision 5 or 6 times as well. But I remember a question being asked a little bit ago. I can't tell what this is going to do to my district. How am I going to know how this cut's going to hit my district? I need a roadmap. And the answer back was, well, that's your school board's decision. And ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you that is the most pertinent discussion that this body needs to face. We fund a block grant model that goes to your local school boards. Your local school boards are the ones that determine how that money is used. If they choose to pay teachers more to attract teachers in that school district, they're going to have to take that money from somewhere to pay those teachers a higher salary. Our model salary, I don't have it right off the top of my head, but there's nobody in this state that's paying the model salary. I can guarantee that. Nobody. I can also guarantee that there's nobody in this state that's paying their superintendent the model salary. And that's where this argument and discussion comes in about administration, right? We want to have this discussion that administration is bloated and administration is way over the top. It's not the case in all school districts. And I think these blanket statements across the board about education is where it becomes really, really muddy for us to have this discussion. The talks about automatic escalators. They're not really automatic escalators. They're the cost of doing business. And I think that we all have our inherent biases as we look at education policy. But we've got to try to take those blinders off and have an objective conversation about what do we want our students to learn. They are our future. They absolutely are the people that will replace us in this house. I'm a model. Okay, I came out of this model. I think a lot of people in this body came out of this educational model. And am I for cuts? Yeah, I think we could probably right size just a little bit. Am I also for doing a little bit of tax increases? You bet. Because we've got a $300 million a year deficit. And I'm not sure I can tell you right now, I've seen a bill that's out there right now that's going to cut transportation and completely get rid of it. I'm not so sure that I want to tell any kid that they've got to figure out a way to get to school. And if their parents can't afford to get them to school, how are they going to go to school? That's a couple $100 million savings. Sure, we can cut it. Is it the right thing to do? So I think we've had a lot of questions fielded, and I appreciate the majority floor leader taking the barrage of bullets coming down on that side there. But I think it's a much bigger discussion, and I would encourage any of you that have really deep-seated issues with the way our educational model is looking. We have an LSO person here that's just phenomenal and knows this stuff inside and out. If you haven't met him, I will introduce you, because you will learn so much. And if you come in here with these broad statements that administration's too big, I encourage you to reach out to a small school district. Find the superintendent that's doing 4 jobs. That's the hard one. Because as I've learned in the past 5 years, broad brushstrokes in education don't work. To my good friend who's up on the east side of the winds that was up here just a few minutes before me, talking about making sure that we get rid of IFs or whatever we want to get rid of to try to right size. We can control that. And I encourage every single one of you, if you guys have an amendment to cut education or to right size education, however you want to frame it, bring it. I voted for this bill to come out of committee because I think it is inherent upon this body of 60 members to have this discussion. The 9 of us in that committee room, we all have our ideas, but I think the 60 of us can make this situation much better. Am I for this bill on final passage? That's yet to be determined. But ladies and gentlemen, we're here to do our jobs, and that is to make legislation better. If you have ideas, bring them forward. Let's talk them out and let's do it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion, Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm up here on the sales and use tax increase. To me, it's hidden kind of in the bill. Is it constitutional to even put something in like that in this bill? We've talked about how you can't, all we've talked about most of this legislative session is fee increases and tax increases. We cannot tax ourselves into prosperity. We have to cut.
Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a report to make to you about a discussion or an email I had with my superintendent. I asked how much we expend in our district on activities. It's $3.8 million in Campbell County. The model is for 2.35 million. So that means that they're transferring 1.45 million out of other places in their budget for activities. Now, on this bill, on this amendment, by the way, it shows that it's going to cost Campbell County $1,660,000. And we can just take 1.45 million out of activities. And that will solve pretty much 90% of that reduction. So that shows that we have absolutely a need for more cuts than this bill shows. So I would be against this amendment because of that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further discussion, Representative Wharf.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I guess there's been several questions that have all came back talking about how we have this model that we've used. And I will tell the body, I was able to watch a lot of the discussions on the recalibration. I wasn't able to watch it all, but the one thing that I did learn is nobody's following the model that we're currently using. And I don't think there's anybody in this room that doesn't agree with the concept of local control. And so the problem that I keep seeing is I think we got a round peg that we're trying to put in a square hole. Because this body talks about how we think the block grant should be distributed in all the different counties. And what I'm seeing is that depending on where you're at, you're given local control to your county, and they're allocating those resources as they deem warranted. The problem that I see is none of those counties are obligated to follow the model that we're basing the decision on the block grant that's awarded to them. And I know I just got in a pickle at home. Everybody is upset that I just co-sponsored a bill that had a 3% reduction. And they were all upset that I was telling them how to cut it. And I tried to make it clear through our local paper, but they didn't represent what I said. And I said, it all comes down to local control. All we can do is control how much of that block grant goes to our areas. And I really think that that's the elephant in the room, if I can say that, Mr. Chairman. But it appears to me that we have a problem with the block grant program, because I can tell you, when I talked with my superintendent, the problems that we have in my superintendent's office are vastly different than those from the speaker that was just before me. And I think that's the problem that I see, is we're trying to put this round peg in a square hole, and we can keep hitting this sucker and it'll go. We'll get it in that hole. But is that really what we've been elected to do? I think we all recognize there's a problem. I really think we need to assess that. And one of the things that I didn't know, Mr. Chairman, I would like to know, I hear about the basket of goods that's contained in the direction that this body gives our education department. And I don't know if I missed that, but that's one thing I'd like to know was, when we talked about recalibration, did we talk about the basket of goods? Did we talk about the things that should be included, that the education department is obligated to, or the local superintendents are obligated to take care of those? Or has that been discussed? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or thank you, everybody. We're running against the noon hour here, so I'll recognize the majority floor leader one more time.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So that's a great question on the basket of goods, something I left out. And absolutely. So the basket of goods, now we got to understand what the basket of goods is. The basket of goods is the educational program. That is what do you teach? Do you teach math, science, English, language arts, social studies, science, CTE, fine and performing arts, music, whatever that is. And so all of those are outlined in statute. And then the court said you can determine that, and then you have to fund that. And so when our consultant in recalibration looks, they look first at our basket of goods. So in 2017, when we did recalibration, we did an extensive review of the basket of goods. And every state surrounding us was requiring the same things taught. Every high-performing state in the nation was requiring the same subject matter be taught. And so I don't understand what that is. And then so here, like just a year or two ago, we actually put in computer science. We actually added to the basket of goods. And so we asked the question in recalibration, so what if we pull one of those elements out? Will it appreciably change the cost of education? And the consultants just flatly said no. And I don't know how many you'd have to pull out, or what obviously you pull math out, you're probably going to really change the cost of education. But we have had those conversations on the basket of goods. And then the block grant versus, the old question, do we provide education just as the model states? One, the model we create, not the one that the consultant does. Or do we allow our local electeds to do that through a block grant? If we want to do it We can do some of that. We have. We've taken individual elements out. If you want to do that, let's have that discussion. Let's have that debate. We used to have a summer school extended day outside the model. Instructional facilitators were outside the model. As we started to cut, we threw everything in the model, in the block grant, excuse me. But if you want to have control over every element, then we just as well do what Hawaii does and have one school board in the state, because that's what Hawaii does. One school board dictates to every school in the state of Hawaii. We can have that debate. I don't support that. If local people don't like what their local elected boards do, they kick them out just like they kick us. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Majority Floor Leader. I'll take a motion for lunch.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House stand in recess until 2 p.m. so I can get a drink of water.
Members, you've heard the motion on the floor. What's your pleasure? All those in favor of recessing until noon, please say aye. Those opposed? Okay, you've heard the motion. We are in recess until noon or till 2 p.m. Committee announcements. Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 8, Transportation, will meet as soon as we're all down in the meeting room to discuss House Bill 241, 228, and Senate File 89.
Chairman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 1, Judiciary, will meet upon noon adjournment in room number 1 in the tunnel on the east side to consider House Bill 218, bias motive crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, members. We are adjourned until 2 p.m.